Imagine this. You're in America, late 1800s. Oil is the lifeblood of a new world, lighting up homes, fueling factories, and creating fortunes overnight. But amidst the smoke and steel, one man sees something nobody else does. He understands that oil won't just light lamps, it will build empires. His name? John D. Rockefeller. To some, he was a genius, the man who brought order to chaos, making oil cheap and accessible for millions. To others, he was a ruthless monopolist, a tyrant who crushed his rivals, allegedly bribed politicians, and built the most powerful and feared company America had ever seen, Standard Oil. At its peak, Standard Oil controlled over 90% of America's oil. It was a behemoth, a monopoly so vast that the government itself felt threatened. This power was built on a simple but brutal strategy: absorb or destroy. Rockefeller would offer to buy out his competitors. If they refused, Standard Oil would undercut their prices, driving them into bankruptcy, and then buy their assets for pennies on the dollar. He mastered the art of vertical integration, controlling everything from the oil wells to the delivery wagons. He even secured secret, preferential rates from the railroads, giving him an unbeatable edge. But this relentless expansion created powerful enemies. Muckraking journalists, like the legendary Ida Tarbell, whose own father was driven out of business by Rockefeller, exposed the company's predatory practices. Public outrage grew, and politicians were forced to act. In 1911, the Supreme Court delivered a landmark ruling ordering Standard Oil to be broken up. It was the corporate death penalty. Everyone thought the beast had been slain, but here's where the story takes a turn that most people miss. When the government dismantled Standard Oil into 34 separate companies, they thought they were ending Rockefeller's power. Instead, they accidentally multiplied it. John D. Rockefeller retained significant shares in each of these new independent entities, companies you know today as Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron. He didn't lose his fortune. He watched it explode. Overnight, he became the world's first billionaire. And at that moment, the name Rockefeller stopped being about just one man. It became a dynasty. With the antitrust battle behind them, the family's ambition pivoted from just accumulating wealth to something far greater: wielding influence. This shift was spearheaded by John D. Rockefeller Jr., the son and heir. Haunted by the public's perception of his family as robber barons, Jr. dedicated his life to a new project: philanthropy. But this wasn't just about giving money away. It was strategic. It was about using their immense wealth to shape the very foundations of modern society. They started with medicine. Before the Rockefellers, medical practice in America was a chaotic, unregulated mess. Anyone could call themselves a doctor. The family funded the Flexner Report of 1910, which led to a complete overhaul of medical education. They established standards, funded research universities like the University of Chicago and Rockefeller University, and promoted a model of medicine focused on pharmaceuticals and surgery. This act of charity effectively shaped the entire modern medical industry, deciding which types of treatments received funding and legitimacy, and which did not. Their influence is still felt in every hospital and medical school today. Next, they turned to education. Through the General Education Board, the Rockefellers poured hundreds of millions into schools and universities, especially in the South. On the surface, it was a noble cause to improve literacy and opportunity, but it also gave them the power to shape curriculums, to promote a specific worldview, and to ensure that the educational system produced the kind of citizens and workers that the new industrial economy needed. They weren't just building schools, they were building a mindset. But their ambition didn't stop at America's borders. The Rockefeller Dynasty went global. After the devastation of 2 world wars, the family saw an opportunity to build a new international order. They were instrumental in the creation of a new kind of global governance. John D. Rockefeller Jr. even donated the land in New York City for the United Nations headquarters. They helped found and fund powerful private international policy groups like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, where world leaders, CEOs, and top academics meet behind closed doors to discuss global issues and coordinate policy. Think about that. From a single fortune built on oil, the Rockefeller family's influence expanded into the very institutions that govern our health, our knowledge, and our global politics. It's a quiet power, operating not through force, but through funding, foundations, and influence. It's a power that shapes the world from the top down. This isn't a story about a greedy family. It's a masterclass in how immense wealth transforms into enduring power. Power that doesn't need to be loud or public. Power that works by setting the agenda, by funding the experts, and by building the institutions that we all come to rely on. The Rockefeller Dynasty shows us that true power isn't just about owning things. It's about shaping the way people think. From the kerosene lamp in a 19th century home to the halls of the United Nations, the Rockefeller legacy is a hidden thread woven into the fabric of our modern world. It proves that a fortune, when strategically applied, can last for generations, quietly influencing decisions that affect us all, every single day. How does a boy from a poor, broken home become the richest man in the history of the world? This isn't just a story about money. It's a story about power, strategy, and how one man built an empire that still shapes our world today. This is the story of John D. Rockefeller and the birth of Standard Oil. Long before he became the world's first billionaire, John Davison Rockefeller was just a boy obsessed with numbers. Born in 1839 in rural New York, his childhood was a study in contrasts. His father, Devil Bill, was a charming traveling con man who often disappeared for months, leaving the family to fend for themselves. His mother, Eliza, was a devout, disciplined woman who taught her children to be frugal and hardworking. She instilled in young John a powerful belief. Every penny was a gift from God that must be accounted for and multiplied. This strange mix, a swindler father and a pious mother, forged a young man with a unique genius. He wasn't an inventor. He didn't discover oil or design new machines. His genius was organization. By the age of 16, he was already keeping meticulous ledgers, tracking every single cent he earned and spent. He once said, "I always tried to turn disaster into opportunity." And in 1859, an opportunity of historic proportions struck. In a small Pennsylvania town called Titusville, oil was discovered gushing from the ground. Suddenly, this sticky black liquid, once used for medicine, became the fuel for the Industrial Revolution. Kerosene lamps lit up the night, and factories roared to life, all powered by oil. Fortunes were made overnight, but the oil rush was pure chaos. Prices were erratic, wells were drilled haphazardly, and businesses rose and fell in a matter of weeks. While everyone else rushed to strike it rich by finding oil, Rockefeller saw the real opportunity not in drilling, but in controlling it. He started a small oil refinery in Cleveland with a partner, Maurice Clark. But unlike his competitors, he wasn't interested in a quick buck. He was obsessed with efficiency, eliminating waste, and reinvesting every single dollar of profit back into the business. While others flaunted their new wealth, Rockefeller lived modestly, pouring his energy into one single goal: building a system that would guarantee wealth forever. By 1870, this vision took form. He founded the Standard Oil Company. The name was a masterstroke of branding. In a chaotic market, Standard promised quality, consistency, and reliability. But Rockefeller's true weapon wasn't just a good name. It was a ruthless, brilliant strategy. He began making secret deals with the railroads, securing transportation rates so low that his competitors couldn't possibly compete. He would then approach his struggling rivals with an offer: "Sell to me at a bargain, or I'll drive you into bankruptcy." Most sold. Those who resisted were crushed as Standard Oil flooded the market with cheap oil, forcing them to close their doors. Rockefeller would then scoop up their assets for pennies on the dollar. Competitors called it predatory. He called it good business. This relentless strategy worked with terrifying efficiency. By 1880, in just 10 years, Standard Oil controlled an astonishing 90% of America's oil refining industry. Think about that for a moment. A single company, led by a single man, held the energy lifeline of the world's fastest-growing economy. Standard Oil became more than just a company. It was a behemoth. It owned everything from the oil wells to the refineries, the pipelines, the railroad cars, and even the retail stores. It seemed like every single drop of oil in America passed through Rockefeller's hands. As the profits exploded, he became the world's first ever billionaire. In today's money, his fortune would be valued at over $400 billion. That's more than Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates combined at their peaks. But with this immense wealth came intense public hatred. He became the poster child for the robber barons, the industrialists who grew unimaginably rich, seemingly at the expense of the common person. The journalist Ida Tarbell, whose father's oil business was ruined by Standard Oil, wrote a groundbreaking expose, The History of the Standard Oil Company. Her articles painted Rockefeller as a cold, calculating monster who bribed politicians, manipulated markets, and destroyed anyone who stood in his way. The public outcry grew so loud that the government could no longer ignore it. After years of legal battles, the U.S. Supreme Court delivered a landmark ruling in 1911. Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly and had to be broken up. On the surface, it was a crushing defeat. Rockefeller's empire was shattered into 34 separate companies. But here's the twist. Rockefeller owned a significant share of stock in every single one of those new companies. Many of them would go on to become giants in their own right. Companies you might recognize today like Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron. The breakup, meant to destroy his power, ended up making him even richer. The government thought it had slain a dragon. Instead, it had unleashed a hydra. Now, here's the part of the story that often gets overlooked. Haunted by his public image as a villain, Rockefeller embarked on one of the most remarkable transformations in history. He dedicated the last half of his life to giving his fortune away. He didn't just write checks, he revolutionized philanthropy. He funded the creation of major institutions like the University of Chicago and Rockefeller University. His money helped create the modern field of medicine, leading to the eradication of diseases like hookworm and yellow fever. By the time he died in 1937, he had given away over $500 million, a sum so vast it is hard to comprehend even today. Was it genuine charity, or was it the ultimate strategic move to launder his reputation? Critics argue that his philanthropy was just another form of control, shaping education, science, and medicine to reflect his own values and embedding his family name into the very fabric of American society. And this leads us to the most crucial part of the story. Rockefeller didn't just leave behind a fortune, he left behind a dynasty and a blueprint for enduring power. His wealth and influence were passed down through generations, branching out from oil into banking, politics, and global organizations. The Rockefeller name became more than just a symbol of money. It became a symbol of a force that quietly shaped the 20th century. John D. Rockefeller once said, "The way to make money is to buy when blood is running in the streets." He lived by that creed, turning the chaos of the oil boom into an unshakable empire. But the story of Standard Oil was only the beginning. The real story is what his heirs did with that power, and how the Rockefeller Dynasty came to influence the modern world in ways you can't even imagine. Imagine one man, so powerful he controlled the flow of energy for an entire nation. One company, so vast its budget dwarfed that of the United to be broken up. This is the story of John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil, and how the attempt to destroy an empire accidentally created a dynasty that would shape the 20th century. By the late 1800s, Standard Oil wasn't just a company, it was the company. It refined 9 out of every 10 barrels of oil in America. Its pipelines were the veins of the nation, and its deals with railroads choked out any hope for competition. At the center of this web sat John D. Rockefeller, a man of quiet habits and ruthless ambition. He didn't live like a king. He wore simple clothes and ate simple meals. But in the world of business, he was a conqueror. Competitors called him cold-blooded and relentless. He didn't see rivals. He saw inefficiencies to be eliminated. And it worked. By 1900, Standard Oil was worth more than the entire annual budget of the U.S. federal government. This wasn't just wealth, it was a concentration of power that started to terrify America. This era was known as the Gilded Age, a time of staggering fortunes and deep inequality. Titans like Carnegie in steel and Vanderbilt in railroads were giants, but Rockefeller stood tallest and was the most feared. The press called them robber barons, predators who rigged markets and corrupted democracy. And Rockefeller was their poster child. To his critics, Standard Oil wasn't a marvel of efficiency. It was a tyranny. Then came the woman who would shake his empire to its core, Ida Tarbell. She was a journalist whose own father, an oil man, had been crushed by Standard Oil. In 1902, she unleashed a series of articles in McClure's magazine titled The History of the Standard Oil Company. It was an expose that hit like a bombshell. She laid bare the secret railroad deals, the predatory pricing schemes, and the labyrinth of shell companies Rockefeller used to hide his control. The public, already wary of monopolies, was enraged. The image of this single, tight-lipped man holding the nation's economic lifeblood in his hands became a symbol of corporate evil. A new cry echoed across the country: break up Standard Oil. The call was answered by President Theodore Roosevelt, the trust buster. He saw monopolies as a direct threat to democracy, giving private citizens power that could rival governments. In 1906, the U.S. government filed suit against Standard Oil under the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was the legal battle of the century. The case dragged on for 5 long years, piling up mountains of evidence detailing Rockefeller's absolute dominance over the oil industry. Finally, in 1911, the Supreme Court delivered its verdict. Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly and must be dissolved. The empire was shattered into 34 separate companies. From its ashes rose new names you might recognize: Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco. The public celebrated. The monster had been slain, or so it seemed. But here's the incredible twist that history buffs love. The breakup made Rockefeller richer than he had ever been. When Standard Oil was dismantled, shareholders received stock in all 34 of the new companies. As the majority shareholder, Rockefeller suddenly owned a piece of every single one. As these new, independent companies competed and thrived, their stock values skyrocketed. Almost overnight, John D. Rockefeller's fortune doubled. The government's attempt to diminish his power had turned him into the world's first billionaire, cementing his status as the wealthiest man in modern history. This moment was the great turning point. The breakup transformed Rockefeller's wealth from a single, centralized oil empire into a diversified portfolio of empires. Dividends from these new energy giants poured into the Rockefeller coffers for generations. But the family's wealth was no longer just about oil. It flowed into everything: railroads, banking, and massive real estate projects. The attempt to break the monopoly had, ironically, created a modern financial dynasty. But all the money in the world couldn't fix Rockefeller's public image. He was still seen as the ultimate robber baron, the face of corporate greed. He needed a second act, a path to redemption. And so, in the years following the breakup, he began one of the most ambitious rebranding campaigns in history. He reinvented himself as a philanthropist. He established the Rockefeller Foundation in 1913, which funneled hundreds of millions into scientific research, public health, and education. He founded the University of Chicago, which became a world-class institution. His funding helped eradicate diseases like hookworm and yellow fever across the globe. To many, the transformation was miraculous. The ruthless monopolist had become a benevolent saint, using his immense fortune to uplift humanity. But critics saw it differently. They argued his philanthropy wasn't just charity, it was another form of power. By funding medicine, he could shape the direction of science. By funding universities, he could influence the education of future leaders. Was this true redemption, or was it simply empire building by another name? By the time John D. Rockefeller died in 1937 at the age of 97, he had outlived almost all of his old rivals. But he didn't just leave behind money, he left behind a system. His son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., took the reins, expanding the family's influence into real estate, developing landmarks like Rockefeller Center. His grandsons and great-grandsons entered politics, finance, and global affairs. The family name became synonymous with power, attached to institutions like Chase Manhattan Bank and the influential Rockefeller Foundation. What started with oil had become something far more enduring. The government's crusade against Standard Oil was meant to end the Rockefeller empire. Instead, it supercharged it. From one man's iron-fisted monopoly emerged a family dynasty whose influence would quietly stretch into the corridors of power in Washington, the laboratories of modern medicine, and the boardrooms of international finance. John D. Rockefeller built a fortune, but his descendants built a network that would help shape the world as we know it today. When John D. Rockefeller died in 1937, he didn't just leave behind money, he left behind a meticulously engineered plan. Unlike the Vanderbilts, who saw their massive railroad wealth vanish in a single generation, Rockefeller believed that discipline and legacy were far more important than mere indulgence. His heirs weren't given the freedom to waste the family fortune. They were trained to expand it. This is why the Rockefellers didn't just fade away after the breakup of Standard Oil. They multiplied. They grew roots in places where money alone can't reach, places where influence outlasts even the mightiest dollar. And the first architect of this powerful dynasty was his only son, John D. Rockefeller Jr. John D. Rockefeller Jr. was nothing like his father. He wasn't a ruthless, cold-blooded tycoon. He was shy, deeply religious, and more comfortable with books than boardrooms. For a while, many wondered if he had the steel required to manage one of the world's greatest fortunes. But what Junior lacked in his father's charisma, he more than made up for with caution and a deep sense of duty. He believed the family name carried not just wealth, but a profound responsibility. So, he began a strategic pivot, investing heavily in philanthropy, real estate, and, most importantly, respectability. It was Junior who funded the construction of Rockefeller Center in New York City. This wasn't just a building project, it was a monumental undertaking during the Great Depression that provided thousands of jobs. It became a landmark, a symbol that the Rockefellers were no longer just robber barons. They were builders of America. But Junior's vision extended far beyond real estate. He amplified his father's philanthropic efforts, channeling immense sums into education, religion, and culture. He donated the very land that would become the headquarters for the United Nations. He financed the complete restoration of colonial Williamsburg. Through these acts, he didn't just spend money. He skillfully rewrote the Rockefeller name for the 20th century. John D. Rockefeller Jr. had 6 children, 1 daughter and 5 sons. It was these 5 brothers who would take the family's wealth and transform it into a sprawling dynasty of power. Each son carved out his own distinct domain of influence. John D. Rockefeller III focused on philanthropy and global population initiatives. Nelson Rockefeller dived headfirst into politics and government. Lawrence Rockefeller became a pioneer in venture capital and environmental conservation. Winthrop Rockefeller established a political foothold in the American South. And David Rockefeller took command of banking and global finance. Together, they didn't just manage wealth. They managed influence on a scale the world had never seen. Among the brothers, Nelson Rockefeller was the one who truly craved the spotlight. Charismatic, fiercely ambitious, and bold, Nelson wasn't content to operate from behind the scenes. He wanted direct power, political power. He served 4 terms as the governor of New York, becoming a dominant voice in the Republican Party, and he even made several determined runs for the presidency. Though he never reached the White House as president, Nelson left an indelible mark on American politics. He became Vice President of the United States under Gerald Ford in the 1970s. For a family built on oil, this was a monumental achievement. The Rockefellers had stepped directly into the machinery of government. Nelson's career proved that Rockefeller wealth wasn't just financial capital, it could be converted into political capital. While Nelson played the game of politics, his brother David played an even bigger one: global finance. As the chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank, David transformed it into one of the most powerful financial institutions on the planet. He wasn't just another American banker, he was a global statesman. He held private meetings with kings, prime ministers, and presidents across the globe. He was instrumental in opening financial doors to the Soviet Union and China during the Cold War. Wherever power was being brokered, David Rockefeller had a seat at the table. His immense influence wasn't without controversy. Critics accused him of creating a shadow government, an unelected, unseen force with incredible sway over world affairs. Conspiracy theories swirled around him, particularly concerning his leadership roles in elite groups like the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations. Was he just a banker, or was he something more? To many, David Rockefeller represented the family's ultimate evolution from oil tycoons to global power brokers. Beyond the visible worlds of politics and banking, the Rockefellers poured billions into the less visible but equally powerful realms of medicine and science. The Rockefeller Foundation funded research that completely transformed modern medicine. They were behind the eradication of diseases like hookworm and yellow fever. They made massive investments in medical schools and hospitals, shaping the very foundation of medical education. They pioneered groundbreaking studies in public health that are still influential today. But here's the twist. By funding science, the Rockefellers didn't just help people, they guided the direction of medicine itself. Some critics argue that the family's philanthropy was used to influence what was researched, what was taught, and what was practiced. In other words, they weren't just giving money away. They were strategically building a world that aligned with their vision. When you control the flow of knowledge in medicine, you don't just control the present, you control the future of human health. This pattern repeated itself in the field of education. The Rockefellers funded the creation of the University of Chicago, quickly turning it into one of the world's leading research institutions. They shaped the growth of countless other colleges and universities, from the Ivy League to smaller schools across the country. And once again, the pattern is clear. Rockefeller money didn't just buy bricks and mortar, it bought influence. Universities that received Rockefeller funding often promoted ideas that resonated with the family's worldview: efficiency, large-scale management, and social order. For them, education wasn't just charity. It was a long-term investment in shaping the minds of future generations. By the middle of the 20th century, the Rockefeller name was everywhere, on banks, hospitals, universities, and political campaigns. It was associated with conservation efforts and international diplomacy. To some, this was irrefutable proof of their incredible benevolence. But to others, it was proof of their silent, creeping dominance. Were the Rockefellers the most generous family in history, or were they the most strategic? Every dollar they gave away seemed to come with invisible strings attached. Their wealth was no longer just about oil wells and pipelines. It was about networks, relationships, and intangible influence. By the 1970s, the Rockefeller Dynasty was no longer just an American phenomenon. It was truly global. Their philanthropic reach extended deep into Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Their banking interests connected Wall Street to every major capital in the world. Their political network touched both U.S. parties and the highest levels of international diplomacy. Wherever there was power to be shaped, a Rockefeller seemed to be nearby. And unlike so many other wealthy families who faded into obscurity, the Rockefellers masterfully adapted. They didn't cling to oil. They diversified into finance, real estate, science, and culture. Their dynasty wasn't fading. It was evolving into something new. The Rockefellers proved something extraordinary. Wealth doesn't have to die when the founding patriarch does. Wealth can evolve when a family builds a system. John D. Rockefeller built Standard Oil, but his children and grandchildren built something far more enduring, a dynasty of influence that stretched deep into politics, banking, medicine, and education. But this raises a critical question. What happens when a single family's influence grows too powerful, too global, and too invisible? Because by this point, the Rockefellers weren't just shaping America anymore. They were shaping the world. By the mid-20th century, the name Rockefeller meant something more than just oil, more than just unimaginable wealth. It had become a global brand of influence. Imagine walking through New York City and craning your neck to see Rockefeller Center pierce the sky. Or visiting a university in a distant country and discovering its research programs were funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. You could open a newspaper and read about Rockefeller-backed initiatives in politics, banking, and science. The family's public face was one of immense generosity and civic duty. But beneath the surface, something far more profound was taking place. The Rockefellers were no longer just shaping America. They were drawing the blueprints for the modern global power structure itself. At the very heart of this incredible transformation was David Rockefeller. As the head of Chase Manhattan Bank, he took the family's financial acumen to a whole new level. His grandfather, John D. Rockefeller Sr., built a physical empire of pipelines to move oil across America. David built a different kind of pipeline, an invisible one that moved money across the entire globe. He turned Chase into a global powerhouse, meeting personally with world leaders from the Shah of Iran to Chairman Mao in China and Soviet premiers during the height of the Cold War. Under his leadership, Chase Manhattan opened offices in over 100 countries, embedding Rockefeller influence directly into the arteries of global finance. His personal Rolodex wasn't just impressive, it was the stuff of legend. It was a who's who of global power, containing the private numbers of presidents and dictators, Wall Street CEOs and United Nations officials. David Rockefeller had them all on speed dial. This unprecedented access sparked intense debate. Critics accused him of running a private, unelected empire, a kind of shadow diplomacy that operated outside the normal channels of government, making deals and influencing policy behind closed doors. To his supporters, however, David was a visionary, a bridge builder who believed that connecting nations through the universal languages of banking and business could foster stability and peace. But regardless of your perspective, one thing was clear. Chase Manhattan wasn't just a bank anymore. It had become a primary instrument of Rockefeller power on the world stage. And that power wasn't limited to finance. The dynasty's political influence was expanding just as rapidly. Nelson Rockefeller's term as Vice President of the United States gave the family a direct formal line to the White House. His brother, Winthrop Rockefeller, became the governor of Arkansas, helping to reshape the political landscape of the American South. But their influence often operated more subtly. Rockefeller advisors and allies were strategically placed throughout government, sitting in presidential cabinets, leading influential think tanks, and holding key positions in international organizations. The family didn't always seek the spotlight, but their fingerprints were all over the pivotal decisions that shaped the Cold War, guided U.S. foreign policy, and led to the creation of the very institutions that govern our world today. Which brings us to perhaps their most audacious and lasting legacy, the physical and philosophical shaping of global governance itself. In 1946, the world was still picking up the pieces from the devastation of World War II. From the ashes, a new hope emerged, the United Nations, an organization dedicated to preventing future conflicts and fostering global cooperation. But this new body needed a home. The question was, where? The answer came not from a government, but from a single family. John D. Rockefeller Jr. stepped in, purchasing a large tract of land along Manhattan's East River for $8.5 million and donating it to the fledgling organization. Just stop and think about that for a moment. The United Nations headquarters, the single most important piece of diplomatic real estate on the planet, a place where nations debate war and peace, where the fate of millions is decided, stands on land given by the Rockefellers. This wasn't just a charitable act, it was a profoundly symbolic one. It forever linked the Rockefeller name to the very heart of global diplomacy, placing them at the center of the new world order they were helping to build. Meanwhile, another arm of the family's influence, the Rockefeller Foundation, was becoming one of the most powerful philanthropic forces in history. Its reach was staggering, its fingerprints appearing everywhere across the globe. The foundation funded the Green Revolution, a series of agricultural innovations that dramatically transformed the food supply in Asia and Latin America, feeding billions. It poured immense resources into global health programs, pioneering new treatments and public health strategies. It supported international education, scientific research, and cultural preservation on an unprecedented scale. To many, this was the family's greatest gift to humanity, a selfless effort to uplift the world. But as the foundation's power grew, so did the questions. A darker interpretation began to emerge. Was this philanthropy also being used as a strategic tool of control? After all, when you fund a university's research, you have a say in what gets studied and what gets taught. When you fund medical programs, you influence which diseases get prioritized and which cures are pursued. When you fund agriculture, you can shape what the world eats and who controls the food supply. From this perspective, the Rockefeller Foundation wasn't just generous, it was brilliantly strategic. It was a quiet, guiding hand shaping the development of the modern world from behind the benevolent mask of charity. By the 1970s and 80s, the family's immense and often hidden influence made them a prime target for conspiracy theories. David Rockefeller, in particular, was linked to a trio of elite, secretive organizations: the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderberg Group. These were gatherings of the world's most powerful politicians, financiers, and industrialists, and critics accused them of secretly meeting to design a new world order, a unified global government that would serve their own interests. Whether these theories held any truth, or were simply the stuff of political paranoia, they had a powerful effect. They made the Rockefellers seem even more powerful than anyone had imagined. They weren't just rich anymore. They were seen by some as the architects of a hidden system that controlled global politics, economics, and even wars. David Rockefeller himself did little to quiet these whispers. In his own autobiography, he addressed the accusations head-on with a now famous quote: "Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it." Was it a dry, sarcastic joke? A defiant confession? Or a taunt to his critics? For those who believed in a global conspiracy, it was the ultimate confirmation. For skeptics, it was just classic Rockefeller dark humor. But one thing was certain: the statement underscored just how undeniable the family's influence had become. One of the most enduring and complex legacies of the Rockefeller Foundation is in global medicine. They were instrumental in the creation of the World Health Organization. They invested billions in campaigns to eradicate diseases like hookworm and yellow fever. Their funding shaped public health policy and medical education on a global scale for over a century. And again, this legacy is a double-edged sword. On one hand, millions of lives were unquestionably saved. Entire nations were made healthier. But on the other hand, by controlling the flow of money, the Rockefellers effectively controlled the direction of global health for decades, deciding which areas of research and which medical philosophies would receive the backing to succeed. To soften their public image and manage their legacy, the dynasty also invested heavily in culture and conservation. Lawrence Rockefeller became a passionate and influential supporter of America's national parks and a key figure in the modern environmental movement. The family poured money into founding and supporting world-class museums, preserving priceless art collections, and funding cultural institutions across the globe. This was more than simple generosity. It was strategic legacy management. By associating the Rockefeller name with high culture, natural beauty, and scientific progress, they worked to transform their image. They were no longer just the ruthless oil barons of the early 20th century. They were patrons of civilization, guardians of the planet. By the end of the 20th century, the Rockefeller dynasty was woven into the very fabric of modern life. The bank you use might have ties back to Chase Manhattan. The medicine you take could have its roots in Rockefeller-funded research. The university you attended may have benefited from a Rockefeller endowment. The very building where global diplomacy takes place sits on Rockefeller land. The family was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. And that is the true essence of modern global influence. It isn't always flashy, loud, or obvious. It is structural. It is the invisible power that shapes our visible reality. The Rockefellers didn't just build an oil empire. They helped design the modern world. From the flow of global finance to the corridors of international diplomacy, from the laboratories of medicine to the halls of education, their fingerprints are everywhere. But this leaves us with a profound and unsettling question. What happens when one family's influence becomes so global, so deep, and so embedded that it blurs the line between philanthropy and power, between generosity and control? Legacy or empire? The debate over Rockefeller power. The mask of philanthropy. By the late 20th century, the Rockefeller name carried two faces. On one side, the philanthropists, builders of universities, donors to medicine, patrons of culture, benefactors of global health. The family whose money helped cure diseases, feed the hungry, and educate the world. On the other side, the puppet masters, secretive financiers, backers of global institutions, quiet architects of influence whose charity was never without strings. And between these two faces lay the central question: was the Rockefeller dynasty a legacy of generosity or an empire of power? Let's start with the defense. The Rockefeller Foundation has undeniably changed the world for the better. Public health, Their campaigns against yellow fever and hookworm saved millions of lives. Agriculture. The Green Revolution in Asia and Latin America fed billions, reducing famine on a global scale. Education. Universities like the University of Chicago became global leaders, producing Nobel Prize winners and groundbreaking research. Culture. Their investments in museums, art, and conservation preserved knowledge and nature for generations. To supporters, the Rockefellers are the ultimate example of wealth used wisely. They prove that great fortunes, even if built ruthlessly, can eventually serve humanity. John D. Rockefeller himself once said, "The man who dies rich, dies disgraced." His descendants seem to live by that rule. Billions flowed from their coffers into causes that transformed the world. From this angle, the Rockefellers weren't robber barons, they were nation builders. But critics see a different story. Yes, the Rockefellers gave billions, but where they gave was just as important as what they gave. In medicine, their funding shaped what diseases were prioritized, often those that threatened economic productivity. In education, their grants steered universities toward efficiency, management sciences, and centralized models of control. In agriculture, the Green Revolution increased food production, but also tied farmers to industrial systems and corporations. Critics argue this wasn't selfless charity, it was strategic philanthropy. Instead of giving away power, the Rockefellers were buying influence in science, education, and policy. The result? A world subtly shaped in their image. And then there's the darker side of the debate, the conspiracies. By the 1970s, the Rockefellers were accused of being part of a global cabal, a family secretly guiding world events through organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderberg Group. Some claim they were architects of a new world order. David Rockefeller himself fueled the fire when he wrote in his autobiography. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. Was he joking, confessing, or flexing power? To conspiracy theorists, it was the smoking gun. To historians, it was a wry comment from a man tired of rumors. But regardless, the perception stuck. The Rockefellers weren't just wealthy, they were mysterious. And mystery fuels power. Power without office. What makes the Rockefeller story so unsettling is this. They rarely sought direct rule. They weren't kings, they weren't dictators, and they weren't presidents. Instead, they ruled through structures. Banks, universities, foundations, international organizations, power without office, influence without votes, control without crowns. That is both their genius and the source of endless suspicion. Legacy of good or of control? So what's the truth? The honest answer, it's both. The Rockefeller Dynasty has saved lives, expanded education, and supported culture on a global scale. Their philanthropy is real, their generosity undeniable. But it's also true that their giving was strategic. It reinforced their influence. It shaped policies, sciences, and worldviews in ways that benefited their power. The dynasty wasn't just leaving a legacy, it was building an empire of ideas, one that might outlast even their money. Today, the Rockefeller name still carries weight. Their descendants still manage foundations, still sit on boards, still influence global debates on climate, health, and economics. But something has shifted. In the 21st century, new titans, Bezos, Musk, Gates, have taken the spotlight. Yet if you look closely, the blueprint is the same. Ruthless wealth building, followed by global philanthropy, followed by influence that transcends borders. In other words, the Rockefeller model is alive and well, just wearing new names. Closing hook for viewers. The Rockefeller dynasty raises the ultimate question: can great wealth ever truly be selfless? Were they philanthropists who gave the world medicine, education, and peace? Or were they empire builders who used charity as a mask for power? The answer may depend on who you ask, but one thing is certain. The Rockefellers didn't just change America. They changed the very structure of the modern world. The modern Rockefellers. Power in the 21st century. A dynasty that refused to fade. Most dynasties collapse within 2 or 3 generations. Fortunes are squandered, names forgotten, power diluted, but not the Rockefellers. More than a century after John D. Rockefeller crushed rivals with Standard Oil, his descendants are still here, in boardrooms, foundations, universities, and global forums. They no longer dominate oil. They don't run the biggest banks. Their wealth isn't even in the top 10 anymore. So how did they survive? By doing what their founder always did best, adapting. From oil to ideas. The 21st century Rockefellers realized something crucial. The new currency of power isn't oil or steel, it's ideas, climate change, sustainability, social justice, global governance. While tech billionaires fight over rockets and algorithms, the Rockefellers position themselves as the moral voice of capitalism. In 2014, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund made headlines when it divested from fossil fuels. Yes, the heirs of Standard Oil, the empire built on petroleum, publicly declared war on oil. It was more than symbolism. It was branding. The dynasty was announcing, "We no longer represent the past. We represent the future." The Rockefeller Foundations today. The family's foundations remain their most powerful weapon. The Rockefeller Foundation continues to shape global health policy, from pandemic preparedness to food security. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund pushes environmental and peace initiatives, funding everything from climate activism to diplomacy. Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors manages billions for donors worldwide, extending their influence beyond family wealth. These aren't just charities. They are power centers. They set agendas, guide research, and influence governments, quietly, without elections, without fanfare. The name that opens doors. Even without being the richest, the Rockefeller name still commands respect. When a Rockefeller speaks at the United Nations, at Davos, or on Wall Street, people listen. Not because of their personal fortune, but because of their dynasty's history. A name built over 150 years still opens doors in Washington, London, Geneva, Beijing. And that's the genius. While new billionaires rise and fall, the Rockefeller brand is eternal. The quiet billionaires. Here's what's fascinating. Unlike Bezos, Musk, or Zuckerberg, the Rockefellers today don't flaunt private jets or Twitter battles. They operate in the shadows. They sit on non-profit boards. They whisper in think tanks. They fund movements, research, and international coalitions. This is power without spectacle, influence without headlines, the kind of power that lasts. A new image, from greed to green. For decades, the Rockefeller name was tied to ruthless capitalism. Now it's tied to sustainability, climate change, and global cooperation. That transformation didn't happen by accident. It was a deliberate rebranding. By supporting clean energy, conservation, and humanitarian causes, the Rockefellers shifted their image from robber barons to guardians of the planet. And in today's world, where reputation matters as much as money, that shift kept their dynasty relevant. Competition with new billionaires. But let's be clear, the Rockefellers are no longer America's wealthiest family. They don't rival Elon Musk's billions or Jeff Bezos's empire. They don't own the social networks or the space rockets. Yet here's the twist. While tech moguls fight for attention, the Rockefellers thrive on subtlety. Musk might win the news cycle, but the Rockefellers win the long game, because they were not just chasing wealth, they reshaping the systems that define wealth itself. The Rockefeller blueprint lives on. Look closely at Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, or even Jeff Bezos's philanthropy. What do you see? The Rockefeller playbook. Build vast fortune, create foundations, fund global initiatives, shape policy from behind the curtain. The modern billionaire philanthropist is walking the path the Rockefellers carved over a century ago. The dynasty may not dominate Forbes' list anymore, but their model still dominates the way wealth translates into power. The question of legacy. So what will the Rockefeller legacy be in the 21st century? Will they be remembered as the family that turned oil money into human progress, or as the dynasty that never stopped pulling strings, trading one kind of empire for another? Perhaps both. Because that's the paradox of the Rockefellers. Every act of generosity carries the shadow of strategy. Every school they funded, every hospital they built, every climate initiative they supported. All of it may save lives, but also extend their influence. The Rockefellers are proof of one truth. Empires don't always die, they evolve. From oil to banking, from medicine to climate, from John D. Rockefeller to his great-great-grandchildren, the dynasty has adapted to every century. And while today's headlines may be about tech billionaires, remember this: the Rockefellers are still here, watching, funding, shaping. The secrets behind the Rockefeller power structure, the surface versus the shadow. Most people know the Rockefellers for what's visible: oil, philanthropy, and their famous family name. But true power often hides behind the curtain. The Rockefellers didn't just build companies, they built systems. Networks of influence that stretched across industries, governments, universities, and international organizations. To understand how their dynasty survived more than a century, you must understand this. The Rockefellers' greatest empire was not oil. It was control. The web of institutions. The Rockefeller Dynasty embedded itself in the very foundations of modern society. Education. They funded the University of Chicago, Rockefeller University, and reshaped American schooling through the General Education Board. Medicine. They revolutionized medical research, built laboratories, and set the model for modern public health. Banking. Through Chase Manhattan, now J.P. Morgan Chase, they linked their fortunes to Wall Street's beating heart. Global affairs. They supported the founding of the United Nations and financed countless international organizations. Each institution became a node in a larger web of influence. Whenever society evolved, the Rockefellers were already there, quietly guiding the direction. The round table of power. Behind the scenes, the family participated in elite circles that set global agendas. The Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. Co-founded with Rockefeller money, it remains one of the most influential think tanks on U.S. foreign policy. The Trilateral Commission. Created with heavy Rockefeller involvement, it brought together leaders from North America, Europe, and Asia to coordinate global strategies. The Bilderberg Group. The Rockefellers were often linked to this annual private meeting of world elites, where politics and business converged. To some, these were innocent forums for cooperation. To others, they looked like blueprints for global control. The New World Order whisper. Here's where the mystery thickens. For decades, conspiracy theories have tied the Rockefellers to the idea of a new world order, a secret plan for a global government controlled by elites. David Rockefeller in particular became the lightning rod. In 2002, he wrote in his memoirs, "Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal, conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it." Those words ignited endless speculation. Was he admitting to the conspiracy, or was he mocking it? Either way, the statement became legendary. The dual faces of influence. Here's the paradox. On one hand, the Rockefellers funded vaccines, schools, libraries, conservation projects, and research that changed millions of lives for the better. On the other hand, their networks gave them unmatched political leverage without ever needing to run for office. Presidents met with them, prime ministers consulted them, corporations followed their lead. To the public, they were philanthropists. To insiders, they were power brokers, secrets of longevity. How did they maintain this invisible empire for so long? Diversification of influence. They never relied on one industry. Oil fell, banking rose, banking declined, philanthropy gained. Control of ideas. By funding research, universities, and think tanks, they influenced how people thought, not just how they lived. Low profile. Unlike today's flashy billionaires, Rockefellers thrived in discretion. Few headlines, more boardrooms, interconnected alliances. They rarely acted alone. Their web connected with Rothschilds in Europe, Morgans in banking, and later with Gates in philanthropy. The mystery of control. Some historians argue the Rockefellers don't directly control the world. They simply built systems others now manage. Others argue their fingerprints are everywhere, in the design of global finance, in the way the UN operates, in the rise of modern medicine, and in the frameworks of global governance. The truth: the Rockefellers didn't need to control everything. They only needed to shape the rules of the game. When you write the rules, you don't need to play. You already win. Why the Rockefellers still matter. Today, when people talk about secret elites, the Rockefeller name almost always comes up. Why? Because their dynasty represents the perfect blend of wealth, secrecy, and legacy. They weren't just rich. They were rich for over 150 years. They weren't just visible. They were invisible at the same time. They weren't just powerful. They were powerful across generations. That combination fuels both admiration and suspicion. And here's the chilling question. If the Rockefellers could shape nations and institutions for over a century, who is shaping the world right now? Is it today's tech giants, like Musk and Bezos? Or is it still the quiet dynasties, the ones who never left, the ones whose fingerprints are on every institution we trust? The Rockefellers and global reach. The world is a stage. By the mid-20th century, the Rockefeller Dynasty had already conquered America. They controlled oil, banking, medicine, and education. But John D. Rockefeller's heirs weren't satisfied with a national empire. They wanted something bigger. They wanted to shape the world. The birth of the United Nations. In 1946, New York City was chosen as the permanent headquarters of the United Nations. How? Because the Rockefellers made it happen. The family donated $8.5 million to purchase the land where the UN building still stands today. Nelson Rockefeller was one of the key negotiators pushing for New York to host the New World Organization. Without their money and influence, the UN might have been based in San Francisco, London, or even Geneva. It was a masterstroke. By placing the UN in New York, the Rockefellers put global governance in their backyard, banking the world. While the UN was rising, so was global finance. The Rockefellers, through Chase Manhattan Bank, expanded across continents, becoming the first major U.S. bank to open branches in Moscow and Beijing. David Rockefeller, the most internationally active heir, personally met with world leaders from the Soviet Union, China, and Latin America. Chase Manhattan wasn't just a bank, it was a diplomatic tool. David Rockefeller became known as America's unofficial foreign minister. Where governments couldn't go, David could. The Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. But perhaps their most enduring global instrument is the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. Founded in 1921 with Rockefeller support, the CFR remains the most influential foreign policy think tank in the U.S. Almost every Secretary of State, Defense Secretary, and National Security Advisor has been a CFR member. Its journal, Foreign Affairs, shapes debates before policies are even made. To critics, the CFR is the shadow government. To supporters, it's a hub of intellectual cooperation. But in both views, it's clear. Rockefeller influence is baked into the architecture of American foreign policy. The Trilateral Commission. In 1973, David Rockefeller and political scientist Zbigniew Brzezinski co-founded the Trilateral Commission. Its mission: to unite leaders from North America, Europe, and Japan into one powerful dialogue. Critics saw it as a blueprint for one world government. Supporters saw it as a way to manage globalization responsibly. Either way, it proved one thing: the Rockefellers were always at the center of global planning, from philanthropy to geopolitics. Here's the Rockefeller genius. They never separated philanthropy from power. A donation to public health in Africa also built influence in fragile governments. Funding for universities in Europe doubled as cultural diplomacy. Sponsoring international conferences positioned them as neutral conveners, but always with a hidden agenda. Every act of charity also expanded their global reach. The reputation problem. By the 1970s, suspicion of the Rockefellers reached new heights. Books and documentaries accused them of manipulating wars, steering the Cold War, and engineering the New World Order. David Rockefeller's global travel, his meetings with communist leaders, and his role in secretive organizations like the Bilderberg Group only deepened the mystery. To some, he was a visionary bridge builder. To others, he was proof of an elite conspiracy. The Rockefeller hand in global health. Another piece of their global reach lies in medicine. The Rockefeller Foundation didn't just shape American medicine. It influenced global health systems. It funded early vaccination programs across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It helped establish the World Health Organization, WHO. It promoted international medical standards that still guide the world today. Once again, philanthropy doubled as global policy, from one man to one world. Think of it this way: John D. Rockefeller used oil to dominate the American economy. His heirs used philanthropy, finance, and diplomacy to integrate the world into their orbit. This wasn't just about money, it was about vision. The Rockefellers didn't want to rule nations. They wanted to weave nations together in a system they helped design, the unfinished project. But here's the twist. The Rockefeller dream of global order has never been fully realized. The UN is powerful but limited. Global finance is influential but unstable. The New World Order remains more rumor than reality. And yet, the blueprint exists. And the Rockefellers were the architects. So the question is this: did the Rockefellers build the world's institutions to serve humanity or to serve themselves? Are we living in a safer, more connected planet because of their vision? Or are we living inside their experiment, one that we never voted for, the name that never escapes the shadows? Say the word Rockefeller in almost any corner of the internet, and you'll hear whispers: New World Order, secret societies, one world government. For over a century, the Rockefeller name has been more than just a dynasty. It's been a symbol of hidden power. But why? Why has this family, more than almost any other, been tied to the deepest fears of secret control? Part of it comes from sheer visibility. John D. Rockefeller was the richest man in American history. His heirs touched everything: medicine, banking, politics, the UN. David Rockefeller openly mingled with presidents, dictators, and monarchs. When one family appears in so many places of influence, people start asking, is this coincidence or control? David Rockefeller's confession. The most famous spark came from David Rockefeller himself. In his 2002 memoirs, he wrote, "Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it." Those words were like gasoline on a fire. To skeptics, it was proof. The Rockefellers were architects of a new world order. To defenders, it was sarcasm. David mocking conspiracy theorists. Either way, the quote became legendary. The Trilateral Commission and Bilderberg critics pointed to Rockefeller-backed groups as evidence of secret planning. The Trilateral Commission, bringing together elites from North America, Europe, and Asia. The Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, shaping foreign policy in closed-door meetings. The Bilderberg Group, an annual gathering of global leaders shrouded in secrecy. To some, these were forums for cooperation. To others, they looked like blueprints for global control, population control theories. Another strand of conspiracy links the Rockefeller Foundation to population control. In the mid-20th century, the foundation funded research into birth control, family planning, and global health. Critics argued this wasn't just about medicine, it was about engineering society. Some even claimed the Rockefellers had influence over early vaccine programs, sparking decades of suspicion about their role in shaping human health. The oil and banking conspiracy. Others tie the Rockefellers to theories about controlling energy and money itself. Standard Oil was broken up, but the family still profited, holding stock in Exxon, Chevron, and Mobil. Chase Manhattan Bank merged into J.P. Morgan Chase, one of the most powerful financial institutions on Earth. To conspiracy theorists, the Rockefellers never lost power. They simply spread it across companies, countries, and institutions, invisible but ever present. The New World Order myth. The phrase New World Order became cemented in the public imagination during the late 20th century. The idea, a small group of elites, including the Rockefellers, secretly guide global events to create a single world government. Evidence? Rockefeller involvement in founding the UN, their ties to global health and finance, their fingerprints on international think tanks. Critics argue this is just paranoia, but the theory refuses to die because every generation sees new connections, from wars to pandemics to climate agendas. Why the Rockefellers became the perfect villains. Part of it is psychology. They are rich, they are secretive, they are generational. Unlike Musk or Bezos, who flaunt their power in public, the Rockefellers operated in quiet boardrooms, and that silence created a vacuum, one filled with speculation. The less they explained, the more people imagined. Myths that will never die. Some of the strangest stories linked to the Rockefellers include control of the Federal Reserve, though this is disputed. Critics say their influence in banking shaped the central bank's formation. Links to Freemasons or Illuminati, pure rumor, but endlessly repeated. Secret ownership of industries far beyond oil and banking, from pharmaceuticals to media. The truth? Most of these claims are exaggerated or unproven. But once your name is tied to global power, the myths never end. The power of perception. Here's the irony. Whether or not the Rockefellers are really masterminds of a secret world order doesn't matter. What matters is that millions believe it. And that belief keeps the Rockefeller name alive, not just as history, but as legend. So what's the truth? Were the Rockefellers simply ambitious philanthropists, misunderstood because of their scale? Or were they, as critics argue, the engineers of a system designed to concentrate power in the hands of a few? Perhaps the greatest Rockefeller legacy isn't oil, or banking, or philanthropy. Perhaps it's this: a dynasty so powerful it blurred the line between history and conspiracy. Every empire eventually falls. Rome collapsed. The vast British Empire fractured. The seemingly unbreakable oil monopoly of Standard Oil was shattered into pieces. But the Rockefeller name? It remains. They're not the obvious rulers anymore, not the richest family on the planet, but their fingerprints are still all over our institutions, our politics, our medicine, and even our deepest fears. The real question isn't whether they're still powerful. The question is, what does that power actually mean for us today? On the surface, the Rockefellers are no longer the titans they once were. Standard Oil is a ghost of history. The family fortune, once immeasurable, is now spread thin among hundreds of heirs. You won't find them dominating the Forbes list anymore. In a world of flashy tech billionaires and crypto kings, the name Rockefeller just doesn't seem to command the same awe. And yet, they're still there. Quiet, present, enduring. Why is that? Because the true Rockefeller legacy was never about the money. It's about the infrastructure of influence they built. The Rockefeller Foundation continues to quietly shape global health initiatives and climate policy. The family's bank, Chase Manhattan, merged to become J.P. Morgan Chase, still one of the most powerful financial institutions on Earth. The Council on Foreign Relations, which they helped establish, remains a nerve center of U.S. foreign policy. The universities, medical systems, and global organizations they funded and shaped still guide the modern world. Even if the entire Rockefeller family vanished tomorrow, the systems they created would continue to run on their own, a permanent echo of their influence. Here's the most chilling part of the story. John D. Rockefeller was a genius at turning oil into money. But his heirs were geniuses at something far more profound. They turned that money into a worldview, a specific vision for the world, built on global cooperation, centralized governance, and philanthropic control. Now you can look at that and see progress, a noble effort to solve the world's problems. Or you can see it as a subtle and sophisticated form of manipulation. But whichever side you land on, one fact is undeniable. We are all living inside a world profoundly shaped by their vision. But perhaps the Rockefellers' greatest, most enduring legacy isn't their wealth or even their institutions. It's the myth of their power. To millions, they represent the ultimate symbol of elite control, the puppeteers behind the curtain. To others, they're misunderstood benefactors who gave away far more than they ever took. And to conspiracy theorists, they are the very architects of the New World Order. The truth, as it often does, probably lies somewhere in the murky space between admiration and suspicion. But myths are incredibly powerful, and unlike fortunes, myths never really die. So what can we learn from the long reign of the Rockefeller Dynasty? First, that power multiplies when it adapts. They brilliantly shifted from controlling a physical resource, oil, to controlling finance, and then from controlling money to controlling ideas and influence. Second, true legacy isn't about personal wealth, it's about building systems. They created institutions designed to outlive them, to carry their vision forward for generations. Third, they taught us that silence is a weapon. By largely avoiding the spotlight and the spectacle, they made themselves a much harder target to attack. And finally, they proved that reputation can be completely rewritten. They transformed their public image from robber barons, the most hated men in America, to philanthropists, the saviors of humanity. In short, the Rockefellers didn't just get rich. They mastered the art of turning a temporary fortune into permanent influence. So, where do they go from here? In a world now dominated by the new dynasties of tech, the Gates, the Bezos, the Musks, will the Rockefeller name finally fade into the history books? Or will their vast network of institutions continue to quietly guide us through the 21st century, just as they did through the 20th? Are they still pulling the strings from the shadows? Or have they passed the baton to a new generation of billionaires who are now shaping our world? Perhaps the Rockefellers no longer need to be visible. Perhaps their greatest and final achievement was building a world where their influence no longer needs a face. The entire Rockefeller story began with one man's all-consuming obsession: John D. Rockefeller's relentless, ruthless drive for control. That obsession grew into an empire, which then became a dynasty, and ultimately, a legend. And legends, unlike fortunes, do not fade away. Today, whether you see them as heroes or villains, as benefactors or manipulators, one fundamental truth remains. The Rockefellers did not just make history, they became history. And so, as we close this journey through one of the most powerful family dynasties in the world, I want you to ask yourself a question. When you look at the world around you, at our banks, our medical systems, our global politics, do you see a story of natural progress? Or do you see the long shadows of a family that never truly let go? The answer might tell you more about the world we live in and the future we're all heading towards than it does about the Rockefellers themselves. Thank you for watching. If you found this exploration fascinating, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who thinks old money and old power have faded away. Because the Rockefellers prove one timeless truth: money builds empires, but influence builds forever.